This is Dr. Don Eddy with Terrible Schools. There are many reasons that public schools are just terrible. Some would say that public schools are irrevocably broken and will never be repaired. I totally disagree.
I just want to thank all of my viewers, all of my supporters for supporting this mission on exposing the public school system for what it is. A complete failure to help America to become great again. I know there's a lot to unpack right there for some people. The first thing we have to understand is that nationally, only about a third of kids can read and do math at grade level. I'm not sure why this isn't the number one national security issue in this country. I love to paraphrase author Douglas Murray, who says, there are things that we knew yesterday that today we pretend not to know. Yesterday, we used to celebrate this song by Whitney Houston that talked about the children being our future. However, it's almost as if public schools are in the business of subverting children to serve the interests of teachers' unions and other external, quote, educational entities that want to profit off of the public education system. Some in the mainstream media have been reluctant to talk about the rampant abuse in Minnesota and other places about the fraud in the Somali daycare system. There's not going to be much difference between those people and the same people who don't want to admit to the frauds in the public education system. One of the basic problems in education is that it's run by government funds. In effect, it's a government education system. It's not a system for the people and by the people. If it was a system for the people and by the people, then the people would be able to have a say on the types of curriculum their children are exposed to.
They were just terrible.
For example, I teach history. I teach world history and financial literacy at a high school, to be more accurate, but I teach history. And one of the things I find interesting about people who don't teach history, but they talk about history, they will say things like, why don't they just teach all of history? When people say things like that, it's almost as if they are controlled by mantras and slogans. Because these mantras and slogans very seldom are a reflection of reality. And here's what I mean. It's easy to say things like, we're going to create an education system where all children succeed. Again, just an empty slogan, because when you generically use all or never, rarely does it apply all the time. So if you say all children will succeed, you will really have to explain what your metric for success really means.
They were just terrible.
We see the school districts all over the place say that they are succeeding because of high graduation rates, for example. My question is, what good does it do districts if they have high graduation rates but low literacy rates, low rates of being able to perform math at a reasonable level? There are many reasons that these types of things happen. One of the main culprits, in my opinion, is the teacher union, who come up with their own agenda and make this agenda pervasive in the realm of education. As a result, the unions get power at the expense of the kids who they say they care about. If we're honest with ourselves, the unions, teachers' unions, aren't really there to help kids. Ultimately, they're a jobs program for adults.
They were just terrible.
On this channel, I want to explain many reasons why public schools are just terrible. I know that there are some people who will feel offended by the things that I say and will say something like, he doesn't know what he's talking about, he just hates public schools. You're absolutely wrong about that. I was educated in the public school system. But the public school system I grew up with is not a mirror of the public education that kids are receiving today. One of the reasons is because adults have put the children in charge. When I was going to school, adults were clearly in charge. I'm not going to pretend I was a model student when I was in high school, because I wasn't. In fact, I got kicked out of school in my freshman year. So, one of the experiences that I had, in high school as somebody who considered themselves rebellious, let me give you some context.
They were just terrible.
My dad, he was one of these people who will use a cuss word on every other word. Now, I had to give you that background because I decided to act a fool in a class one time where the teacher felt it was necessary to pull me out into the hall and have a conversation. When I had this conversation with the teacher, and we're going to put quotes on that word conversation, this man, this teacher, he taught science and ROTC. He taught Navy ROTC. And this is one of the things that there's the old adage that says youth is wasted on the young. Well, one of the things I didn't realize as a youth is literally where the phrase "curse like a sailor" came from. There was a serious disconnect between me and what a sailor was. Now, logically, I knew this teacher also taught ROTC, Navy ROTC. How was I so stupid to not realize that meant he was literally a sailor? And I'll tell you what, when he called me out in that hallway, he sure in the heck cussed me out like a sailor. And my friends, who also had the tendency to cause trouble, they saw the look on my face, and it got them in line too. And I have to be honest, after that teacher gave me a good talking to, I stopped misbehaving in this class in the way that I used to. The moral of that story is, if that same scenario happened in what is now 2026, it's unlikely that the teacher would still be able to be employed. Instead, me as a disruptive student, I would have felt empowered to have missed the whole point of what he was trying to do. What my goal was as a student was to clown around, was to disrupt, was to draw attention to myself, was to entertain. The job of the teacher was to teach science, and what I was doing was conflicting with his job. And he took his job serious, and so did I. But in a institution that's supposedly meant for higher learning, only one of those philosophies is supposed to reign supreme. But now we have a system where kids are in control. If we're honest, a lot of these same kids are in control of their households. So let me go back to the author Douglas Murray. These people are insane for pretending that yesterday's knowledge is no good today. What we knew yesterday is that in a lot of cases, the brain biologically isn't fully formed until between 25 and sometimes 27 years of age. All of that being said, it doesn't give a pass to kids who don't believe in the idea of self-determination and ideas of working hard to improve their particular situation. For different reasons, schools have made discipline almost an ugly word. And public schools are trying to do just about everything they can to avoid punishing kids who are the primary disruptors in the educational process. I know that there are a lot of people who have their theories on why these things are happening, but there's also an old adage that simply says follow the money. One of the basic things that either people don't understand or know or they don't want to accept is that by default, kids and parents and people in general do things that they're incentivized to do. When you think about the public school system that takes criminal action and instead turn it into law enforcement, they write it up as referrals. Well, there's a couple things that are positive about the stats and politicians that benefit them. So when a student, for example, steals a teacher's credit card and runs it up, instead of turning that kid in to law enforcement, they just write it up as a referral. And they pressure that teacher not to talk. When a student who does this type of thing continuously gets away with this type of activity until they are 18, how can we then pretend to be surprised when they're 18 running these same kind of scams in regular society? some point, we have to start being responsible for the type of kids that we're producing in public schools through the policies we're producing. We have to hold teachers accountable. We have to hold students accountable. We have to hold parents accountable. We have to hold superintendents accountable. Anybody who is in the system who say that they're fighting for children, let's hold them accountable. And instead of indoctrinating these kids about their feelings and mental health, let's go ahead and give these kids basic skills so they won't have mental health problems in their adult years as a result of having elementary school skills as adults in the working world.
This is Dr. Don Eddy, and I'm going to leave you with this. Why is one child's right to an education more important than another child's right to safety?